Okay, hello and welcome. This is Travis McEwen, and I'm going to be going over Lab 4 for our CIS 236 Networking 1 course for Whatcom Community College. Off we go. So what this lab is doing is kind of just practicing a little bit of how we can connect devices together, going over some of our basic configurations on switches, doing some configurations on the PCs, so setting IP addresses. And then we're also going to be configuring some additional management as well for, say, remote work like Telnet or SSH for our switches. So let's go ahead and kind of walk through our steps in Lab 4 and get things kind of configured and set up. So remember, first things that we want to do is we need to cable everything together. So to do so, we'll go down to the bottom left-hand corner here at the lightning bolt, and that's our connections window. And we're going to select the different types of cables that we need for making our connections here. Now, remember, when we're talking about our connections, uh, we use a straight through cable represented by this straight black line when devices operate at the same or dissimilar layers. So if I'm using a PC, is at layer 3 because it understands what an IP address is, and I connect it to a switch which operates at layer 2, which is our data link layer, which just operates and understands what MAC addresses are, we use a straight through cable. So if it's a layer 3 device to a layer 2 device, we use a straight through. But if we, so I'll mark this up real fast. If I can spell. Spelling is hard. So straight through is used between non-similar layers. So then if we want to use a crossover is used when we go between devices that operate at the same layer. So crossover cable would be something along the lines if I have a switch which is at layer 2 to another switch which is layer 2, or if I'm going from a router which is layer 3 to another router which is layer 3. So a crossover cable is used between similar layers. So hopefully that kind of helps with explaining what cable to use when. So again, we use a straight through cable when we're going between connecting devices between dissimilar layers. So a PC, which is layer 3, to a switch is layer 2. So I'd use straight through. We use crossover if we're going between similar layers, so switch to switch or router to router. And a crossover cable is represented by that dashed black line, and a straight through cable is represented by the solid black line. So in this case, we want to connect PC1 up to switch 1 on fast Ethernet 01. So we'll select our copper straight through cable. We'll click on the PC, select its Ethernet port, go over to the switch, and we're going to connect it to fast Ethernet 01. And then we'll go over to PC2 and we'll do the same thing. We'll click on PC2, connect it to its fast Ethernet port, and then connect this over to fast Ethernet 01 as well. And now the next thing that we want to do is connect switch 1 gigabit 01 over to switch 2 gigabit 01. So again, because this is dissimilar device, or they are similar devices, they're both at layer 2, we'll use a crossover cable, and I'll select gigabit 01, and we'll go over and select gigabit 01 over on switch 2. Okay, so next we want to go through and perform some of our basic configs, and we're going to be doing our basic configs on both of our devices. So what it wants us to do first is to set a host name. So we'll go into move from user uh, mode into privileged exec mode by typing in enable, or just shorthand en. And we'll go into global configuration mode with conf t, and we'll set our host name as S1. So then it also wants us to move into setting passwords. So for setting passwords on the console port and also for privileged exec passwords, so we'll start with our privileged exec because we set that from the global configuration mode. And we'll say enable secret class. And now remember, when we're setting our privilege exec password, we have two options whenever we're setting a privilege exec password. We can either say enable secret or we can say enable password. So both of these commands do the exact same thing, but enable secret is more secure. So it will encrypt the password right out of the gate, where enable password will leave the password as plain text, and we have to enter in the command service password encryption in order to hash it afterwards. So it's better in this case to always do the more secure option. So if you ever see this uh, uh, guideline or option that task that you're supposed to complete, which is set a password on privilege exec, always use the most secure option at your disposal unless otherwise specified. So in this case, we'd want to use enable secret class. Okay, and then we're going to go, we're going to set our password on the console port as well. So we'll go into line console 0, and this is the, if we look at the port itself, this is the console port that we would be plugging in a rollover cable into, or what's also known as a console cable. And so this is, again, this port is for physical access into the device itself. So we're going to go ahead and set our password. We're going to say password, and it wants it to be Cisco. So we'll say password Cisco, and then we'll enter in login because that applies the password to that interface. And then the next thing that we want to do is in step 3, prevent unsolicited and debug messages from interrupting your console session. So to do this, this goes underneath our line. So underneath our console port or underneath, say, our VTY, depending on how we're accessing it. So in this case, to do this, we use the command, as I've stated before, logging synchronous. So logging synchronous means that anytime that there's a new update message that comes in that normally will show up here, instead of it interrupting you while you're typing, it will print it on a new line and allow you to continue typing as you keep going. So that's our logging synchronous. So that's what logging synchronous does. So the next thing, we're on to step 4, configure a message of the day banner. So we'll type exit, and remember exit will back you out one run level. So if I type exit, it will take me back to global configuration mode out of line console 0. And we're going to type in a banner, and we'll say banner MOTD, and we'll just say restricted access. Okay, and now the next thing that it wants us to do is to disable unwanted DNS lookups. So we can use the command no IP domain dash lookup. And now what this command does for us is it turns off those DNS lookups where it will attempt to figure out what your potential alias is. So this command is more of a quality of life command. So if I accidentally enter in a command like that, it will automatically just pop in an invalid input detected. However, I'm going to go over to switch 2 where I don't have that turned off. And if I do the same thing, it will start trying to translate and go, wait, that might actually be a command. I'm going to go try and figure out what it is. But it will fail because it's not an actual thing. So the no IP domain lookup stops that command from going through. So it's a quality of life command in the event that you accidentally fat finger or misspell something. All right, so we've done step 5. We are now on to step 6. Add a description to S1 and S2's interfaces connected to the other devices. So we have fast Ethernet 01 is going to PC1, gigabit 01 is going over to switch 2. So we'll go into our fast Ethernet FA0/1. So we use the int command or interface for short, and then the port you want to go into. And then we'll say, if you don't know what to do, remember you always have a question mark to enter in, but we're going to use the description command. And if you're like, okay, well, I know description, but I don't know what to type next, again, we can use the question mark and it will say just type. That's what line means, is you can type up to 240 characters to describe this. But in this case, our description is just going to say to PC1. And so any traffic, that's what this port is going towards. And so we're also going to go into our gigabit 01 port, and we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to say that it's going to S2. So we'll say description to S2. Okay. And now what we want to do is to encrypt our enable and console passwords. So to encrypt them, again, we use the service password-encryption command. And that will encrypt all of our passwords on that are currently running on this. And now the next thing that we want to do is set up a username and password as well. So we're going to, underneath global configuration mode, again, if we're like, hey, I'm not really sure what to do, we can do a question mark. And we can start to kind of go through and go, okay, well, how am I supposed to actually set this up? So one option as we kind of look through, we can see, oh, well, there's a username down here, so maybe we should try that. So let's say username, and if we're not sure what to do, again, question mark, and we'll go, okay, well, our username should be CIS 236, and then we'll question mark, and I'll get, okay, well, what's the next thing that we should set? And we want to set a password for the user. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and use password right now. I know I said use secret typically, but in this case, we're going to use password. And then our password is going to be class because it's just going to ask what we should be entering in. So we'll say class, and then we'll do a question mark, and it'll just say, go ahead and press enter. And I'm going to do a check results just to make sure that it's doing what we want it to do. So on PC, we're on switch 1. Looks like everything is going great. So far, so good. All right. So after that, it wants us to save our configs as well. So to save our configs, we're going to go back one run level, and we use the copy running -config startup -config. And so what this command actually is doing is it's saying, hey, take the current active running configuration and save it to a file that's located in the NVRAM called startup-config. So the next time this switch boots up, it will boot up with the config that was currently running. And we'll say okay, and that will be our everything that we have kind of up and running. So Now, the next thing is it wants you to go ahead and repeat steps 1 through 9 on switch 2. I'm going to show you a quick little command or way to kind of do this quicker, uh, but only do this if you're comfortable with the command so far. So if we know that we have multiple devices that we have to configure, they're all going to be very similar. You don't have to go through and retype all the commands. So what we can do is we can do a show run. We can open up a notepad and we can copy or highlight all of our current running config and press Control C. Oops. You have to right click in Packet Tracer. It's not like a terminal. Oops. Hang on, small technical difficulty here. We'll highlight, to right click and say copy, go over to our notepad and paste our config in. And now what we can do is we're going to make a couple small changes. So first thing is, if I paste this in right now, one thing that we can do is we can paste a config into a current running device. However, if I paste my config in right now, my password for this device would be this. Good luck. Don't do that. So if I'm doing this, I'm going to make sure that I'm changing up and I can modify my configs in this notepad and paste them in. So such as I can, if I want the device's name to be hostname 2, I can say S2. Enable secret class, no IP domain lookup. We want our password to be class also because that was our step 8 right there. And we're going to change our descriptions because that's to PC2. And our description is over to S1. And we want to make sure that our password here, also going based off of what we had listed here, should be Cisco. And that should be good. So now that we have all that pasted or copied over, here's the trick, is I can go into my switch 2 and I can go into global configuration mode. So I can say conf t and we can highlight everything, press Control C, go over to our terminal here, right click it and say paste. And it should take everything of what I had configured. And we can do a show run. And we can see that everything seems to be copied over, and we can verify also by hitting our check results option. And we can go over and take a closer look at what we have set. So everything looks good. It does look like I've got one small error on the banner message of the day over on switch 2. So we're going to take a look at that one. And so let's see. We'll just reset it. Let's see if that fixes it. We'll go to conf t. And so if I want to get rid of a banner, I can just say no banner MOTD, and I will delete the current banner. Oops. And so what we can do really fast is we're going to go ahead and put a new banner in. So banner MOTD, and we'll try this. And that took it that time, so that works. Okay, I think there was just a couple extra characters that came across. So next thing that we want to do really fast is we want to go ahead and configure the PCs on our systems. So we're going to go over, so it wants us up at our top here to set the PCs to 192.168.1.10. So we'll go over to our PC, we'll go to the IP configuration, and we'll set 192.168.1.10. And then our subnet mask, which is all 255s with a 0 at the end. We'll get into subnet masks later. We'll go over to PC2 and we'll do the same thing, but it's 1.11. So we'll say 192.168.1.11. We'll set that. And then the next things that it wants us to do is to set up, do some test of configuration. So if we want to test pinging, we can do that in a couple different ways. We can go to the command prompt and we can say ping 192.168.10.11. And the first one will fail because the ARP table is being built out, but then the next following should go through. So we see request timed out, but we should see, oops, it's giving me request timed out, which is odd. Should be pinging. Oops, that is because I had a typo. It's not 1.11, it's 10.11. Right? Oh no, it was supposed to be 1.11. I just pinged the wrong address. So let's try that again. There it goes. Now our pings are working. Helps if you try to ping the correct system. So let's give this another shot. So let's go down so we know our connectivity is working. Another thing that we can do if we want to test connectivity really quickly is there's this little envelope with a plus sign on it. It says add simple PDU if you hover over it. This will send a single ICMP message between the two devices. So I can click on the PC that I want to be the sender and the PC I want to be the receiver. And in the bottom here, you can see whether it is successful or not. And so that's another quick way that we can kind of test as we go through. So the next things that we want to do is set an IP address on our switches. So to set an IP address on our switch, because our switch is a layer 2 device, it doesn't understand how to put an IP address on any of the physical interfaces. So the physical interfaces are all layer 2 ports. They don't know what an IP address is. They can't read it. They'll never know how to deal with it. So what we do on a switch in order to allow us to still be able to get into those devices for remote management is to configure what's known as a switched virtual interface, or in our case, what we're configuring is a VLAN. So to do this, we'll go into our global configuration mode, and we're going to be going into a VLAN. So it's a virtual port that we're creating on this device. It doesn't physically exist, but it exists in the memory of the device, and it will respond. And if it sees traffic to it, it understands that how to react and forward traffic to this virtual interface that physically exists inside. So we'll say int VLAN1, which already exists on this device. You can see it on our running configuration. And then we'll go in and we'll set our IP address to 192.168.1.1. And we'll set our subnet mask as it was requesting. And then we'll make sure that it is turned on with the no shutdown command. So now that this port is on and active, by default, our VLAN ports will start in a down state. So we want to turn it on and make sure that it's turned on from there. We'll go over to our switch 2 as well. And we'll do the same thing. We'll go into int VLAN1 and we'll set our IP address. And I think it wanted us to do it to 1.2, and it did. So we'll set it to 1.2 with our standard mask, and we'll make sure that the port is turned on as well. Okay, so now that we've gotten that configured, the next thing that we need to do is configure Telnet and configure our connection between the ports. So we're going to go into, we're going to exit out of our area, and we're going to say line VTY 0 space through 15. And we're going to say set a password on the VTY lines, and we're going to call our password is just the word telnet. And then we'll set login. And we'll go over to switch 1, and we'll do the same thing. So we'll go into line VTY 0 space 15, and you'll notice that I actually didn't have to exit out. I could just move directly from one interface over to another. So I was in the VLAN, and then from that one, I just wanted to go into another one, so I went into line VTY 0 through 15. So from here, we do the same thing. We're going to say password telnet, and we're going to say login. And we can see that in this case, our completion is all done, but let's go ahead and actually test and make sure that telnet is working. So we'll go over to PC1 here real fast, and we're going to open up a terminal, or actually, sorry, we can actually do it from the command prompt. Oops. And we're going to try and actually connect in. So we'll use the telnet command. And if you don't know what to do, again, question mark is your best friend. So / question mark, and it's going to say telnet, then the target and the port that you want to connect up to. So we're going to say telnet, and we're going to connect up to 192.168.1.1. And then let me see 1 second. And then telnet uses the port, sorry, got distracted there for a half a second. Telnet uses port 23, so we'll try and connect in with port 23. It'll prompt us for a password, and our password is Cisco, or is it class? Oh no, our password is telnet because we just said that. And there we can see that I am able to connect into our device. Now, this is one way you can connect in through it, through the command prompt, but you can also do it through a terminal. But we need to change the connection type to telnet. So let's see, I think there is a telnet SSH client down here. And we can set it to telnet, and we can just enter in the address in this fashion as well. And we enter in our password telnet, and there we go. So hopefully that helps with kind of walking through a little bit of what the steps are and kind of gives a little bit further explanation onto them. If you do have questions on things, please feel free to let me know at any point in time. All right, thank you.